verses. And while they work on the slides, there we go. We have a volunteer who would want to read the first 4 verses. Exodus chapter 17. Steve, thanks.
All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me."
So it almost is like wash, rinse, repeat. So they get done with escaping the Egyptian army, and the first thing they encounter is no water. There's no good water, so they complain. And now we're just a little ways removed from that, where God miraculously provided water to them, and now they're doing it again. But if you remember from last time, when we were talking about their complaint, last time, who was it directed against? Does anybody remember? When they didn't have water, they complained to... No, they didn't complain directly to God. They complained to Moses. And they're doing the same thing again. They complained to Moses, "Hey, Moses, you brought us out here to die. There's no water." And they're doing it again. They're complaining to Moses, "Give us water to drink. There's no water." And Moses has this response. "Why are you complaining to me? Think I just have water in my pockets? You think I'm made of water?" Like a parent to their child. And Moses has this other response. So he asks, "Why are you complaining?" But that other statement, "Why are you testing the Lord?" If you remember last week, we talked about how when we have a complaint, we have to determine who we're complaining to and who has the power to answer our complaint. So the Israelites, God was the one they should have been bringing their need to, right? And that difference between asking the right question versus just complaining. So last week, the Israelites knew they needed water. It was a need. They were out of water. You've got more than 1 million people. You've got all the livestock. Water's going to go fast. And if you don't have any, right, it's kind of a serious thing. But instead of coming and saying, "God, we're in need, save us," they're complaining. "You brought us out here to die. There's no water." There's a big difference between those two different approaches. And it all comes down to attitude. And here, the people have seen God provide water when they had none. And then they go on to complain about not having food. They see God provide food when they had none. And God is continually leaving them on the edge of need. But do they bring their needs to God? They're not. They're just complaining to Moses. When we think of God working on our behalf, how often does He work on our timeline? Not that often. It's not like you pray and immediately you find the thing, right? It's not like you pray and God immediately delivers whatever it is you're requesting of Him. But God knows what you have need of. And He really just wants us to ask, but then He provides within His own perfect timing. It's interesting that instead of learning a lesson from them complaining up to this point, and then saying, "We've seen God provide," maybe we can trust him to do that again. They're kind of stuck in the, oh, we complained before, and then we complained again. I bet if we complain one more time, then we'll still get what we want. It's hard to trust God's sovereignty sometimes. But as we look at them kind of complaining and Moses' response, so what is their complaint and who are they complaining to? What's their complaint? What is it? No water. And who are they complaining to? Moses. So, what doubts or beliefs, I think that should be verse 2. That's the wrong one. What doubts or beliefs are leading them to ask this question and make this complaint to Moses? Like if we go a layer deeper than just, we want water. What is it that's driving them to that point? Like if you were missing water, what would be that deeper thought process? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so there's this physical bodily response that's driving them, and they're probably thinking about, if we don't have water, we're going to die. So it's a serious thing, right? What about their approach in doing it? What is motivating them to follow this particular approach, do you think? Complaining to Moses. Talking to Moses first and then also doing it in a complaining way. Okay. Past experience. It worked before. Probably don't need to change, right? Yeah. Their vision is so small. They're not viewing God as God. They can see Moses. They can't see God. They could see God more than we see God, though. There was the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that went before them miraculously, which was embodying God's presence with the people. But the cloud wasn't talking to them. The cloud wasn't somebody they could get angry at. So they're taking all of their frustrations and all of their fears, and they're dumping it on the person they can talk to. You know, we often have the same struggle, right? If you have a spouse or a good friend or a close family member, a lot of times we'll take our fears or our struggles and we'll pour them out on that person, when perhaps we should be taking them to God. And when we take them to the person, is it usually, can you please help me with this? I need something. No, it's normally like, oh, those people, that thing, right? And we pour out and vent our feelings on them. And God's sitting up in heaven waiting for us to turn to Him and say, Lord, I need you. So are we much different from the Israelites? I don't think so. I don't think so. They were struggling with the same things that we struggle with now today. The difference is they didn't really have a completed Bible that they could turn to and continually remind themselves about. We do. So we probably have less excuse. Yeah, they could see God working. They got to see all the miracles. Yeah, maybe. But you know, it's the same struggle. Whether you see God do the miracle live and in person in real color, or you read about all of the things that have happened, you still have to have that belief inside you. And even Moses, in verse 4, where is Moses' faith with God? How does he come to God? They're going to stone me. Hey, God, we've kind of run into this same kind of jam where we don't have the thing, And I think they're really angry this time, and I'm afraid. This is beyond, I can't do the whole make water appear out of nowhere thing. But I'm scared. And so even God's approach, Moses' approach to God is not where he should be. In a perfect world, right? Like if he was the high spiritual leader who had everything together, because our spiritual leaders always have everything together, right? But if he was, wouldn't he have said, Lord, it seems that you've brought us to a place without water again. And yet I know you've provided, and you can provide again. And we need you to do that now. A lot of times our emotions and our feelings drive our response. Anybody think that's true? All you got to do is go back into the little kids' classroom. You can see it. We do a lot better job hiding it. But the same is true for us. Our feelings and our emotions drive our responses. How we interact with people, right? And that's exactly what's going on here, is if we would take that extra split second to go that next level down, right? So, obvious they don't have water, they should be concerned, but that next level down is, am I believing and trusting God or am I not? And am I letting that drive my response? Or am I letting my fear, which is the next level up of the thing that I don't have right now, am I letting that drive my response? But yeah, God. It doesn't mean that we can't bring those concerns to other people or leaders. But when we do, we should have thought through what that approach should be, what it should look like, what it should sound like. Am I doing this to tell other people just because I really want to gossip about it and see what they know? Do they have the other information, right? Is that our approach? Or are we going to leaders to dump on them and be like, you better fix this, and boy, I'm going to twist your arm until you do? Or are we really taking it to God and leaving it with Him and saying, Lord, I don't know what your time frame is and I don't know what your solution is, but it really seems like we need you to be present right now. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can't do it alone. Yeah. Eric, did you? Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, not having water in a desert environment, that's kind of a big concern. But it still goes down to, even if it's an immediate, important concern, how is our approach and how is our attitude? Yeah. 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 What's his first? Human response, right? It's not my problem. Why are you talking to me? You ever see that, like, well, I guess my kids are in that stage right now. It's like, it's not my job. I'm not supposed to do it. But what if Moses had said, let's turn to God right now. Let me lead you in the right way. And, they're trying to figure out this whole talking to God thing. Like, hey, he showed up out of the blue. And they're trying to reestablish this relationship with God. But I think it's helpful to think through when we look at this example. How we start is really important. And a lot of times, if we just take those extra few seconds or extra few minutes to think through what's my deeper motivation, who should I start with, and how should I be approaching them? Sarah? Yeah. Right. Some people have that as a really easy automatic default, and some people don't. And it's okay. God accepts all of us exactly where we are, but He's always going to encourage us to get closer and closer to Him, no matter where we're on the spectrum, right? One would have thought that the Israelites would have by now learned their lesson. So they saw all of the plagues in Egypt that God did and preserved them from. Saw them preserve all of them during the angel of death coming into the land. He brought them out. They crossed the Red Sea. Pharaoh's armies defeated. He provided them water when they didn't have any. He provided them food when they didn't have any. And now they've traveled further into the wilderness. So it says, as they were in the wilderness of Sin and at Rephidim. So they've now traveled even further into the desert. And now they don't have water again. And it seems like the whole, wow, God has shown up for us when we really needed Him to thing has not sunk in yet. And a lot of times we think that if God would just show up, if He would just speak to us, if He would just write on the wall, if He would just visibly be present, it would make it so much easier. The Israelites literally had that, and it wasn't easier for them. And I think that it's that deeper thing where if God doesn't completely open up our heart and our mind, and we are not willing to completely open ourselves up to Him, then there's a block often. And the Israelites are like, sure, we'll take all the stuff from you, but we're not quite there yet. We can have the same problem today. And ultimately, we are blinded by our own sin, by our own desires, and it's not putting God on the throne in our heart where He needs to be completely. They struggled with it all the way back then. They struggled with it all the way through the judges and the prophets and the kings, all the way to the time of Jesus. Jesus struggled with lots of people who didn't have their heart towards God the way they needed to be. And it is no different today. I think that one of Satan's methods of working against us is to get us to forget what God has done in the past by focusing us on our immediate needs and concerns. Oh, you don't have that shiny thing, or there's this problem, or you had a great day. Oh, everything's good. But with God's Word, spending adequate time in it, whatever that means to you, right? Spending time in God's Word and continually reminding ourselves, what has God done? Where has God brought His people? How has God worked? We have to continually be reminding ourselves of that so that we can continually bring him forward with us. Because I don't think we need all the details of the future, which if we travel with the Israelites through Exodus, right? They don't know what's coming next. Oh, we're in the desert further, and there's no water here. Now what? It's not that they need to know the future, and we don't either. It's that we need to know how God has worked in the past and that he's with us today. And that's actually the theme of this message today, is that God's presence is real. God has not left them. He made a way through the Red Sea. And they got to the other side, they didn't have water. God didn't leave them, he provided them water. And then they didn't have enough food, so they complained. But God didn't leave them, he was right there with them and provided them food. And he's doing the water thing again. He's like, okay guys, and it's kind of interesting, this idea of testing comes up several times in Exodus, where back in 15:16, God said, I did this to test them. And Moses is like, why are you testing God? And God's basically giving them another test. Do you have enough faith to trust me? Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And that's where, by God doing all of the miracles in Egypt, he's saying, this is the God who's going to save you. All these other gods that you know about in Egypt, they're nothing. They did not prevent me from doing any of these things. And yet, the Israelites are now being led by this God into the wilderness, and their immediate physical needs are overwhelming that faith. And you know, if and when all of our things are taken away, right? Whether it's our health, or there's relational difficulties, or problems at work, or we lose our job, or we don't have enough money to cover all the things because of the extra bill or whatever. Like, when we start to get pinched in that immediate need type of realm, it's when our faith is tested. Can I trust God through whatever this thing is that I cannot control? The Israelites in the desert, they have no control over the food and the water. They don't. They didn't bring enough with them. And so, to some extent, they're trusting that God's going to do godlike stuff. But when the rubber starts hitting the road, and they're just sitting there spinning their tires and it's smoking, and they're like, we're not going anywhere. You going to put it in gear, God? And Moses, so here, we've had a couple of these, but Moses now in verse 4, he's starting to feel that pressure too. Like, I feel that the tension's different this time, and I'm getting worried. You got a plan, right? So, verses 5 through 7. Would somebody read Exodus 17, 5 through 7 for us? You know, it's kind of interesting to see the story continue. And God responds. And he answers Moses. And let's see. Oh. Interestingly, the way it's phrased is that go on ahead of the people. It's not like leave the people behind and kind of like scout out ahead. It's not like that. It's like more like march in front of everyone. So like be out where you're supposed to be leading. So he's like, get out in front of the people, Moses. You're letting them lead you rather than you leading the people. And then that next part, take the elders of Israel with you. So not everybody is going to be able to see this miracle up close and in person. So what do you need? You need to make sure that the key people who are going to be able to take the word back are going to see what I'm going to do. So bring those key leaders with you so they can physically, visibly witness. And then it's the staff. This is the same staff that touched the Nile River, that turned into a serpent, that was held up to part the waters. The staff is becoming this symbol that's representative of the power of God and what He can do. It's not Moses. Take the staff you struck with the Nile that is in your hand. I'm going to stand in front of you on the rock, and when you hit the rock, water will come out. I will provide. This is not the typical, will drilling operation. Normally you can't just hit a rock and water magically starts coming out in the middle of a desert. But then it says Moses did this, so he did what God told him to do. He got out in front of the people and he took the elders, and he did this in sight of the elders of Israel. So then he named the place Massa and Meribah, which means complaint and testing. And then we get this added thing that wasn't earlier in the story. It says, because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? They're basically saying, is He for real? Where did He go? Doesn't seem like things are going well for us, so He must have disappeared. We don't normally name places around here like complaint or testing or pain most of the time, right? It's not the names we give to stuff. But if we think along the Israelites' line, in what ways have we attempted to put God to the test? Have you recently? Can you think of a time in the past where you were up against the wall and your crying out to God was more of a complaint? I'm sure that we've all been there. And really the point isn't to go back and try to psychoanalyze any of that stuff. It's more to say we're all human beings and we all struggle. And the point of recounting and speaking to each other by reading Scripture is to say, how can we do better the next time we're in those kinds of situations? How can I do better today so that I'm building the relationship that I need? So that it doesn't drastically change when it's a good day or a bad day. Because I know my God is consistent and constant and present. So, what does it mean to test the Lord, and why would that inherently be sinful, do you think? James? Okay. Yeah. Lack of faith and doubt. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you definitely could. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, so it might literally be, well, Lord, I'm not going to do the thing unless you give me some sort of sign. That's kind of what Gideon was doing. You know, God can work through those things, but it does come down to that fundamental, do I trust God? And usually what we're struggling with is not what we've seen God do in the past. Like, I saw that, God. It's that we don't extrapolate that to our future. God, I cannot trust you with my future because I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm not in control, and I'm scared. I'm afraid. And I don't want to give up control. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And that's really, if you go and look through the whole Bible, like every time God is showing up and putting people in hard places, that's all he's really asking people to do is, will you trust me? It might not turn out the way you exactly want in your perfect, ideal situation. But you live in a broken and sinful world in which I am leading you through. And I know the path and the plans that I have for you. Can you trust me with them? And that's where our attention is often. Yeah, Sarah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're trying to extrapolate the Israelites' experience and our experience, and there's a lot of similarities. And when you go through the entire Bible, who does this perfectly? Nobody. Nobody does. I mean, if you set Jesus aside as like somebody different, because, you know, he's also God. But all us normal people, right? God takes everybody through a similar journey, even though the situations are all different. But the journey is the same. I'm going to bring you into these hard situations, and I want you to know that I'm with you. Just need you to trust me because I'll see you through. No matter what happens, right? And you know what is like the silver lining to look at is even when we don't do it the right way. Are the Israelites doing it the right way? Nope. Complain, complain, complain. And what does God give them? Does God withhold and bring them judgment? He doesn't. Here's the water. I know you need it. You complained about it, but you do need it. Here's the food. You complained about it, but you do need it. Here's the food. Here's the water again. It's a need that you have. You're still complaining, but I'm still going to take care of you. I just wish you would continue to trust me more. And even Moses gets to this point. He's like, why are you complaining to me? I can't do this. And he goes to God. God, they're going to kill me. Is he coming with the right attitude to God? No. Moses, go to where I need you to be. Lead the people. I need you to be their leader. Are you leading them the right way? It's okay. Let me come with you. I will stand before you. You will strike the rock because that's what I want you to do right now. And when you do it the way I tell you, I will meet your need. I will provide because I am present. I know they're complaining. I know you feel scared. The question they ask at the end, is the Lord among us or not? God has not left them. Sometimes you can't see him the way you want to. Sometimes you can't feel him the way you want to. But don't we get to those points? God, are you there? I don't see it right now, God. You know, Israel's complaining and questioning, they go hand in hand. And really, when we get to that point with God, we're at the same point, which is saying, God, I don't really trust you right now with this thing. And that's where it's something that we have to kind of recognize in our own heart and our own mind. So if we get to that point, we can say, wait. Should I be approaching God a little bit differently right now? Do I trust that he is who he says he is and that he's going to do what he says he's going to do? Even if I don't know what that is for me? There's Psalm 95. Let me read it to you. O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the heights of the mountains are also his. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, or as on the day at Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work. The psalmist is trying to make sure that we start our hearts in the right place. Recount how the Lord is good. And then there's this reminder, there's going to be those hard days. But when those hard days come, don't default to our human condition, where we test God, where we complain, where we challenge, let's not go there, because you've seen what I can do. So I think there's 3 steps that we can pull, connecting this story where they were at Meribah and Massah, where they tested and complained, and then we have this psalm that pulls that story in. And it's really, if we worship God first, are we starting, whatever the situation is, are we starting with setting our mind in the right place? The Lord, our God, our Maker. Set the right foundation. Worship. And then in Psalm 95, that one verse, it says, today, if you hear his voice. Today, if you hear his voice. Are we listening? So are we worshiping God the right way? And then are we pausing to listen? God, I'm not sure what you're trying to tell me. I'm not sure what I need to learn, but I'm trying to keep my ears open. And then that last one, I think it's, they have seen my work. And I think that's really, can we obey God based on what we've seen him do and what he's told us to do? Can we move forward taking the next right step, even if we don't know where it's going to land? Even if we don't know exactly where the road's going to end? But if we're worshiping and we're listening and we're obeying along the way, we're going to be where we need to be. So I think there's 3 things we can pull out of that psalm. And I think it's a helpful reminder that God wants us to start with seeing how amazing he is. Because when we start from that frame of mind, it makes it a lot easier to listen to that God. It makes it a lot easier to obey that God. It makes it a lot easier to trust that God. Any thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, Christ brings the living water. And, you know, we hunger and we thirst. And he's the bread of life. And when we complain about physical needs without turning to the source, right? It's God will give what we need and we provide if we're looking in the right place and we have the right attitude. I've got one other New Testament, Hebrews chapter 3. Let me read that for you. It's 7 through 15. So it's taking that idea, starting with, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was provoked with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. So, conflating 2 stories. One at the very beginning where they're not trusting God and saying, You're still not giving us what we need. Give us that water. Complain, complain. But then God shows them the promised land. They're still afraid and complaining. God's like, okay, now I'm mad. You guys are going to be stuck for 40 years in the wilderness. So there's this challenge and warning. Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you any evil, unbelieving heart leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end, as it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. You know, there's this challenge. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. You know, it's easy to do that if you're holding on to things. God, you didn't. I asked you and you didn't. I can't let that go. Like, whenever we hold on to something, if we close fist something, we're hardening ourselves around whatever that idea, thought, object, person, relationship, you name it. If we hold tightly to anything, we have the chance of that becoming a barrier between us and our relationship with God. There's this challenge to hear God's voice. And we would say, just speak to me. Clearly, audibly, send a note, I'll read a letter. Like, if you would just show up, like you did with the Israelites. They saw it and they had the same thing. They were holding on to things. So in Hebrews it says, take care, brothers and sisters, lest any of you do I have an open hand with all of the things in my life? It's my spouse, my family, my siblings, my mom and dad, my job, my retirement, my 401k, the new car I bought, or the old car I didn't buy, or need to fix up. Whatever the thing is, right? My good health or my lack of good health. There's so many things on our plate. But do we have an open hand where we say, God, I can't control any of these things. I'm letting you have them all. I'm being vulnerable. I'm being open. Because I trust you. Or are those the things that we're kind of siphoning away and say, well, I trust you with all these things, but not these other ones. So going from the Old Testament to the New Testament, there is a challenge that the same heart that we all struggle with, the Israelites struggle with in a very real way, God still loved them. They weren't perfect. We're not perfect. God still loves us. But there's a challenge. It's exhort one another every day. So let me do that today for you. I'm exhorting you all today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Just consider, is there anything you're holding back from giving it to God completely? It's not an easy thing. It's not an automatic thing. It's something that humanity has struggled with for going all the way back. This is like 4,000 years in history. We're not that different. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. You know that, did God take them into the wilderness not knowing where they were going to go? Nope. He knew exactly where they were going. Now, did they take some circuitous route through the desert? They actually did. They did not take the direct route. And that's the struggle we have is, God, I want the direct route. I want to bypass all the hard things. And He's like, no, I need you to trust me, but the only way you're really going to do that is if we go on this journey together through the hard things. So you can see that I show up. Is it easy to forget God's there when everything's going great? You bet it is. It's like, I don't need Him so much. I'm great, God. You better go help those other people. God is present. God is present all the time. He knows our situation. We can't go on. The rest of the chapter is how God shows up when Amalek, the Amalekites show up. They're desert raiders. They have camels. They come and they think the Israelites are going to be easy pickings. It's where we get to meet Joshua for the first time. But God is still with them and present. They should definitely lose. They're not an army. Moses says, Joshua, go find whatever men you can. Find some men. Like, get them. I don't know who they are. Like, it seems like it's not like, grab the army. We're good. It's very much like, wow. But God delivers them because God is present. God sees what they need and provides for them. This is the story of Moses holding up the staff. And it says, while the staff is in the air, the Israelites prevailed. But when the staff was lowered, when the representation of God's presence was diminishing, then the Amalekites prevailed. So Joshua sets Moses down and holds up his arms. You don't have to do this alone. God is present, and we're going to trust Him. And they win. So you can read that story in the next couple of verses, but I'll leave you with this. Today, hear His voice. We've got God's Word open here in Sunday school. We'll have it open to us yet again as we partake in the service. But don't harden your hearts. Don't let those life circumstances or challenges harden your heart to God where you hold something back. That's what the Israelites were doing. Where were their hearts really still? In Egypt, we had all the great food. In Egypt, we didn't have to worry about where our meal was coming from. Their hearts are still in Egypt with the things they wish they had. Comforts. Their heart is not with, man, God is with me, and that's where I want to be, even if it's the hardest place on earth. So, hold firm through whatever you're going through, because God's present